Chapter 3, Estates and Interests in Land. Learning Objectives. Number 1. Describe the evolution of real property law in BC. 2. Explain the concept of an estate in land and describe the fee simple, life estate, and leasehold estate. 3. Explain the difference between an estate and an interest in land that is less than an estate. 4. Explain what it means to say an interest runs with the land. 5. Describe the scope and extent of ownership of land. 6. Define and be able to apply the tests that determine whether an item is a fixture or a chattel. 7. Describe the two methods of co-ownership of land and the distinctions between them. 8. Describe who owns the land. 9. Describe the difference between crown ownership, private ownership, and treaty settlement lands. 10. Describe how land is subdivided. 11. Explain the difference between traditional subdivisions, strata title subdivisions, and airspace partial subdivisions. 12. Describe how strata developments are created. 13. Describe how the common law dealing with the transfer of estates and interests in land has been changed by the Torrens system of title registration. 14. Explain the underlying purpose of the Torrens system and how it is achieved. 15. List and explain the four main components of our Torrens system: the principle of indefeasibility, the registration principle, the abolition of the doctrine of notice, and the assurance fund. 16. Describe the process of conducting a search of title, and 17. Identify when a manufactured home must be registered.
Question 1 is 52. That's on my page 2 here. Sorry, it's on my page. Yeah, it's on my page 2. Which of the following statements about the fee simple estate are true? And the answer is only C. And which is C? Number 3, C. Only C is the term fee simple indicates an estate that can be inherited without qualification. So fee simple means you can pass it down without qualification. 53. In BC, there are three basic requirements for an easement. Which of the following is a requirement? And the answer is 4. The easement must be capable of forming the subject matter of a grant. So the easement must be capable of forming the subject matter of a grant. Forming the subject matter of a grant. That's a requirement of an easement. 64. A building scheme. And the answer, a building scheme 2, is a group of restrictive covenants usually applying to all lots in the same subdivision. So say, for example, Foxtrot Enterprises in near Morgan Creek makes a huge subdivision. So Foxtrot could use a building scheme, which is a group of restrictive covenants applying to every single lot in there so that they were, for example, blue. They have to be all blue. That's just an example. Page 3, 80. Question 80. A life tenancy has been granted to Avon, quote unquote, without impeachment for waste. So without impeachment for waste. For which of the following actions would Avon be liable? And the answer is 4. Avon would not be liable in any of the above situations. And what are these above situations for number 4? 1. Putting new shingles on the garage roof. 2. Allowing the tool shed to deteriorate and collapse. And 3. Cutting down trees on the property. So the answer is 4. Avon would not be liable in any of these situations if there's a life tenancy. But of course there are city bylaws, so that changes things. 90. Mary and John own a piece of real property as joint tenants. Which of the following is true? And the answer is 4. All of the above statements are true, which include 1. Mary could sever the joint tenancy without John's knowledge. 2, Mary and John each have an undivided interest in the property. And 3, Mary and John each have a right of survivorship. So this is a joint tenant situation. 169, the fact that joint tenants' interest does not pass to a personal representative on death is referred to as, this is question 169, 3, the right of survivorship. So with joint tenants, does not pass to a personal representative on death, that is called 3, the right of survivorship. Okay? Yeah, so basically what happens, as far as I know, in a joint tenancy, when you die, you can't pass it on to an heir. You have to pass it on to the other joint tenant. That's it. Sort of like a marriage. And we've got page 4 happening here. 176. A building scheme is, and the answer for 175 is 3. A set of restrictions on a development used to maintain uniformity. So remember the example I gave of Foxtrot subdivision in Morgan Creek, requiring all painting of buildings to be done in blue, for example. So that would be a set of restrictions. That's a building scheme by a developer. 193. Which of the following is not essential in order to constitute a restrictive covenant in law? So what is not essential for a restrictive covenant? And the answer is 1. It must be positive in nature. A restrictive covenant doesn't have to be positive in nature. No, that's number 1. It's not essential. Because the other things are true, where it must be negative in nature, at least 2 parcel property must be involved, and the burden of restriction must have been intended by the parties to bind the land. So those all are essential, but not to be positive in nature. That is not essential. 207. There were 3 categories of waste at common law with respect to real property. Which of the following is not one of those categories? And the answer is 1, equitable. Equitable waste is not a category of waste at common law. But the 3 common law categories of waste are voluntary, permissive, and ameliorating. Voluntary, permissive, and ameliorating. Those are. So equitable is not. That's the odd person out. Page 5. Question 259. Where 2 neighboring landowners contract to prevent one of them from putting his land to a certain use, they are said to have created 3, a restrictive covenant. So a restrictive covenant is where 2 neighboring landowners contract to prevent one of them from putting his land to a certain use. So say, for example, can't build a building over 5 stories because it would restrict the person beside their view. So that would be a restrictive covenant. 310. In BC, there are 3 basic requirements for an easement. Which of the following is not a requirement? And the answer is 3. The dominant and servient tenements must be owned by different parties. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. A dominant and servient tenement must be owned by different parties. No. But these are true. There must be a dominant and servient tenement. That's 1. And 2, the easement must accommodate the dominant tenement. Yes. And 4, the easement must be capable of forming the subject matter of a grant. Yes. All true. But this is not a requirement. 3, the dominant and servient tenements must be owned by different parties. 335. Mary registers a document given to her by John in the land title office. The document states that I, John, grant to Mary and her heirs, assigns executors and administrators, a right of way for persons and vehicles along and upon the easterly 30 feet of the southerly 64 feet of Lot 1, Plan 910, in order to give access to Mary's property, Lot 2, Plan 910. And the interest granted is, number 4, an easement. This is an easement. So basically, easement is It's an access to a part of the land, maybe to get to another piece of land or get to a lake or whatever, or get to a main road. So this is an easement. You got that? For a right of way from a vehicle. Like my dad's property, he's old property on 5345 240th Street. If he had an easement in the back saying, oh yeah, the neighbors can have access to the back, they can drive along. That's an example. And page 6. Right? I'm on page 6, yeah. 419. Ownership in the land includes not only the surface of the land, but also, and I'm guessing, it's 1, the column of airspace above it, insofar as the owner can make effective use of it. So your ownership of land includes your airspace up to where you can use it. Now, remember, this is limited by city bylaws, which might state that you can't build anything over, for example, 3 stories. So anything over 3 stories in that situation would not be an effective use because there's a bylaw forbidding. But anyways, it's a column of airspace above it. All right, 440. Anton holds a life estate pour Autre based on Benton's life. Charles has the remainder interest in fee simple. Anton's interest will terminate when, number 2, Bentley dies. So if Anton has a life estate pour Autre based on Bentley's life, Bentley dies, then his interest will terminate. So there you go. 458. Mary and John own a piece of real property as joint tenants. Which of the following is true? The answer is 2. Mary and John must each have an undivided interest in the whole of the property. So that's Mary and John, they're joint tenants, so they have an undivided interest in the whole of the property. Question 533. Which of the following is not a characteristic of fee simple estate? And the answer is 3. It's a leasehold interest. No, it is not a leasehold interest. No. But these other things are true, actually. It's held subject to the Crown's land use regulations, so on. It may be expropriated by the Crown, yeah. And it's held subject to other individuals' common law rights, yeah. But those are all true, but the thing that is not a characteristic is leasehold interest. No, it's not leasehold interest. 560. Which of the following elements is not required in order to establish a restrictive covenant? And the answer is 4. The covenantor must retain the restricted property, as any subsequent buyer will not be a party to the original contract. So that's not required in a restricted covenantor, a covenant where the covenantor must retain the restricted property as subsequent buyer. No. Because actually, even though Jimmy Pattison has made a restrictive covenant on his neighbors so they don't block his view, if Jimmy sells the property, subsequent buyers will also have that covenant, restrictive covenant. It runs with the land. So the other 3 things are actually true. 1, it must be negative in nature. 2, both the benefited and burdened land must be precisely identified in the agreement or document creating the restrictive covenant. And 3, the burden of the restriction must be intended by the parties to bind the land. Yes, they're all true. But this thing 4, no, that is not required because it does run with the land. 568. Bert and Ernie owned as joint tenants a revenue-producing property which was leased to Oscar. Ernie died, leaving a will which gave his interest in the property to Grover. Grover is now demanding 1/2 of the rent paid by Oscar. Bert refuses his request. Analyze the following statements. And 568. So 3, only A and E are true. And what are A and E? A and E are A. The property, that's for number 3. Only A and E are true. A, the property was held in joint tenancy, and therefore Bert, the survivor, owns the entire estate after Ernie's death. Yeah, if it's a joint tenancy. And also E, Grover cannot have any interest in the property because there was no interest in the property that could be disposed of by way of Ernie's will. So basically, Ernie made a mistake. He couldn't put anybody in his will for that revenue producing property. No, it didn't work. So yeah, it doesn't work because it's a joint tenancy. Which of the following statements is false? 613. And the answer is 3. Where a husband and wife own property as tenants in common and one of them dies, the other becomes the owner of the whole interest. No. If it's a tenant in common use, one of them dies, the other is the owner. No, that's false. But these other things are true. One, where a husband and wife own property in joint tenancy and one of them dies, the other becomes the owner of the whole interest. Yes, if it's a joint tenancy. And 2, where a joint tenant transfers his interest to a third party, the third party becomes tenant in the common with the original joint tenant. That is true. Yeah, a joint tenant, you can transfer your interest to a third party. Amazing. But you can't transfer it upon death. You have to be living. And for a joint tenancy becomes a tenancy in common upon severance. And that is true. If you sever a joint tenancy, it becomes a tenancy in common. But this thing's false. If a husband and wife own property as tenants in common, tenants in common is weaker. So if one of them dies, no, they won't get the whole interest. But if it's a joint tenancy, yes. All right, so the answer for that was 3. If they're tenants in common and one of them dies, no, they don't get the whole lot. That's false. 627. Which of the following situations are consistent with the existence of a joint tenancy under current BC law? And the answer is 1. Only D. And so D is Herman was a co-owner of Blue Acre. When Herman died, the surviving co-owners of Blue Acre automatically become its only co-owners. And that's true. If it's a joint tenancy, then whoever's left over will get it. No heirs or anybody else can get it. It has to be just the other owners. You got it? Everything else is false. Page 9, 658. Mr. and Mrs. Tom Jones and Ashraf Menzies have signed a contract of purchase and sale for a triplex owned by Alan Sinclair. Mr. and Mrs. Jones have agreed to pay $100,000 each, and Ashraf has agreed to pay the balance of $50,000. They would like their ownership registered as a joint tenancy. So who's that? So you've got the Jones couple and Ashraf. They want to have a joint tenancy. Which of the following statements is true in 658? And it's number 2. If their interest is registered as a joint tenancy, Tom Jones, that is, Mrs. Jones, and Ashraf will each own an undivided interest in the triplex. And that is absolutely true. They will have an undivided interest in the tenancy. 664. Ownership of land in BC includes not only the surface of the land, but also 3. Any enhancements to the land, whether contractually stated or not. So if you own land, it's not only the surface of land, but it's any enhancements, yes. 675. Cornelius gave a life tenancy to Ruel, which didn't expressly state anything about Ruel's liability for waste. Ruel will not be liable to the remainder man for, and the answer is 1, permissive waste. So Ruel will not be liable for permissive waste to the remainder man, okay? Even though nothing's in the contract said it. 677 on page 10. The owner of an interest in real property which is located in BC always has, and the answer is 4, common law rights as modified by legislation. So every owner in real property, they do, number 4, have common law rights as modified by legislation. 703. Which of the following statements about chattels and fixtures and chattels is false? What is false? And the answer is 1. Where an item has been affixed for the enhancement of the use of the premises, this is evidence that the item is a chattel. No, it's not a chattel. It's a fixture. And so these other ones are true. Like 2, where an item is affixed slightly to the premises, it'll be considered based on the first impression to be a fixture. That's true. And 3, to determine whether an item is a fixture or chattel, the courts have devised a 2-test part. Yes, there is a 2-test part. And 4, the 2-test part examines the degree of affixation of an item and the purpose of affixation of the item. So basically what happens is they'll look at a thing, and if on the first impression it looks like a fixture, the court will make a 2-part test, and they'll say, okay, now how is this affixed? So maybe they'll yank it, and if it pulls out, it's not. It's a chattel. If it doesn't pull out, then it's affixed. And why? They're going to ask why, how and why. 724. Akiko Yamada vacated the property she just sold, taking all her household furniture, including the following items. And the answer is 3. She's only required to replace item C, which is wall-to-wall carpeting from the den, which had been attached to a tack strip, which in turn was attached to the hardwood floor. So she can take that chattel. The wall-to-wall carpeting from the den that's attached to a tack strip, which in turn was attached to the hardwood floor. She can take that. She's only required to replace that. So she has to replace that. So this has nothing to do with fixtures, right? Fixtures and chattel, does it? She's required to do that. Okay, and I'm moving to the other bathroom so that Isaiah can do his pooping and peeing and teething and teeth brushing. I'm moving. On page 10. That's kind of weird, eh? This is Akika Yamada. And Isaiah wants to get in here, and I'm welcoming him. Welcome, Isaiah. Good morning. Good afternoon. Now I'm going. I'm moving. And hopefully the sound will be just as good here as it was in the other bathroom. And I am counting on my skills as a sound technician. All right. Goodbye, Akiko, on bottom of page 10, 724. You got to replace the wall-to-wall carpeting because it's been attached to a tack strip and it's attached to the hardwood floor. All right, page 11, 804. Which of the following statements about the fee simple estates are true? And the answer is 3. None of the above are true. So these are all false. These are all goddamn false. So why? The term fee means the rights exercisable by the holder of a fee simple estate have been acquired by a payment of money. No, the fee there does not mean money. I forget what it means. Where the owner of a fee simple estate dies without a will, the profit will escheat to the crown. No, that's not true. And C, where the owner of a fee simple estate creates a life estate in that property in favor of some person, the fee simple estate will cease to exist. No, the fee simple continues even though there's a life estate pour autre vie. And D, a fee simple estate is an estate which is held for a limited period of time. No, it's not. It's like forever. So fuck all these. They're all wrong. So that's number 3. None of the above are true. 824, the term fee simple. And the answer is 824. The answer is 1. A and B are true. A means fee simple refers to a type of life estate in land. Yes, it does refer to a type of estate in land. And also, let me see. B is also true. Fee simple indicates something less than absolute ownership of land. What? It's less than absolute ownership. Well, I guess the Crown has got absolute low ownership, so fee simple is kind of like 99% there. I believe that's true. And okay, so there you go. 841. 841. 841. Which of the following is an interest in land that can be valued? So, what can be valued is all of the above, number 4, which include number 1, an easement or right of way. Yeah, that can be valued. 2, airspace above land. Yes, that can be valued. And 3, a tenancy agreement. Yes, it can also be valued. So these are all of the above. Number 4 can be valued in an interest in land. 849 in the middle of page 12. Robert's dying of a terminal illness. He therefore arranges for his wife, Elaine, to have a life estate with respect to his ancestral home, with the fee simple to go to his daughter Whitney once Elaine dies. Okay, so here's a guy dying of cancer, whatever. He arranges for his wife to have a life estate in his ancestral home, but the fee simple will go to the daughter Whitney once Elaine dies. So 849, the answer is 2. Was Whitney's interest in the land, the daughter's, is that of a remainder man. So she's a remainder man. Okay? So the estate is originally for Elaine, but she's Whitney, the daughter, is a remainder man. Remainder man. Bottom of page 12, 880. A life tenancy has been granted to Avon without liability for waste. For which of the following actions would Avon incur liability to the remainder man? And the answer to 880, drumroll please, is 3. So this is where she's liable to the remainder man. Number 3, the destruction and removal of all buildings from the land out of spite to the remainder man. Wow. So she gets pissed off. She destroys and removes all buildings from the land because she hates the remainder man. So she'll be liable. She'll be fucking liable. Okay? And page 13, 882. Just wait a second. Yeah. All right. 882 and page 13. In BC, there are 3 basic requirements for an easement. Which of the following is one of the requirements? And 882, it's 2. The easement has identifiable or defined boundaries. So that's the thing about easements. There's got to be identifiable or defined boundaries. Yes, identifiable or defined boundaries. Yes. 925. A building scheme is a special example of a group of restrictive covenants attaching to 2 or more lots within a particular development plan. All right. Which of the following statements concerning building schemes is false? And this is 925. The answer is 3. Builders must negotiate any exemptions from the application of the building scheme individually prior to the purchase. No, they can't do that. They want to buy into Foxtrot's blue-colored development because the building scheme says everything's got to be blue, so that's a group of restrictive covenants. The buyer cannot negotiate an exemption, but all these other things are true. Original purchase must receive their fee simple title from the same seller, yes. Seller must have intended restrictions to bind each lot, yes. And the restriction number 4 must apply equally to all the individual lots and be consistent with a general scheme of the development. Yes, it's all true. But you can't negotiate an exemption, number 3. No, that's false. 952. A limitation or restriction placed upon the use of one's land for the benefit of another is called 952. 3. A restrictive covenant. Restrictive covenant is a limitation or restriction placed upon the use of one person's land for the benefit of another. That is a restrictive covenant. 14. Which of the following statements about easements are true? And the answer is 3. Only C is true. And C is where a right or privilege over land benefits a long established trade on a dominant tenement. This has been held by the court in some cases to be sufficient to create an easement. So this is true. Let's do it again. Question 972, the answer is 3, which says only C is true, and C is where a right or privilege over land, this is the easement, benefits a long-established trade on a dominant tenement. This has been held by the court in some cases to be sufficient to create an easement. Yes. 983. Which of the following is not one of the 3 main classifications of interest in land that are less than estates? So what is less? What is not less than an estate? And the answer is 4, life tenancies. These are not one of the 3 main classifications of interest in lands that are less than estates, the life tenancies. They're not less than an estate, life tenancy. But the other things like easements, profits à prendre, and restrictive covenants, they are definitely less of an interest in land. And then page 15. 985. A restrictive covenant imposes a restriction on the use of one person's land for the benefit of another piece of land. Yeah. Which of the following statements concerning restrictive covenants is false? And the answer is 1. The covenant must be worded in positive terms. No, it's negative terms. But all these other things are true, actually. 2, the restriction must be intended by the parties to bind the land, because restrictive covenant, it binds the land. For example, Foxtrot's subdivision, it said everything's got to be painted blue, all buildings. 3, the person who agrees to be bound is called the covenantor. Yeah, if you agree to be bound, you're the covenantor. And 4, a restrictive covenant will not be enforceable where the character of the neighborhood has been changed so as to make enforcement useless. So say, I don't know. Anyways, so it could become useless if the whole neighborhood's character is changed. But this is false. 1, the covenant must be worded in positive terms. No, it doesn't need to be positive, the restrictive covenant. And the last question is 996. Which of the following statements about fixtures and chattels is false? And the answer is 2. A seller of real property has the right to detach and remove any fixture after entering the contract of purchase and sale if he or she desires. No, they cannot remove a fixture, but they can remove chattel. You get it? So all these other things are true, where chattel becomes attached, even slightly to real properties will be prima facie, be considered a fixture unless circumstances show the property is intended to remove a chattel. So if it becomes attached, hey, it's a fixture. And 3, when an owner of a house attaches a mirror to the wall to better use the mirror, he or she usually be entitled to remove the mirror when the house is sold and seller moves out. Yeah, they can do that. They can remove the mirror. Unless it's like bolted with like the strongest bolts and everything in the planet that cannot be changed, welded there. And 4, if an object cannot be removed without damaging the real property, this is indication the object is a fixture. So if you can't get rid of the thing without damaging your property, it's a fixture. But so those are all true, but this is false, saying that you have the right a seller of real property has the right to detach and remove any fixture after buying it. No. So that's wrong. So anyways, I hope that some of these learning adjectives, like, I think I got to do this separately. Three examples of trespass. What are the major characters of that tort of trespass? Who can sue? List the defenses for trespass. What remedies are... We didn't even talk about trespass here in the questions. Anyways, I'll have to do that later. Focusing on the questions first. Over and out, everybody.